The conference room hummed with conversation as my phone lit up with Jason's name. Expecting the usual small talk, I stepped into the hallway, but his voice came through sharp and smug. "I'm divorcing you," he announced, almost triumphant. "I already sold the apartment, so you'll need to figure out where you're going to live. Enjoy that." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The audacity, the sheer lack of remorse, it was almost laughable. My fingers tightened around the phone as I absorbed his words. "You sold the apartment?" I asked, my voice steady. "Yeah," he chuckled. "Ashley and I need the money to start our life together. She deserves better than that tiny place anyway." Ashley. The name stung, though I had suspected for months. His late nights, sudden work trips, and the growing distance between us all pointed to someone else. But to hear him say it so casually, as if I were the intruder in their story, lit a fire in my chest. "Sounds good," I replied coolly, refusing to let him hear me crack. Up until that call, I had believed in our 6-year relationship, in the life we had built together. The apartment, our cozy 2-bedroom in the city, had been a symbol of that, but now, looking back, I saw the cracks I had ignored. Jason's dismissiveness, the way he brushed off financial discussions with a charming smirk, his effortless ability to make me feel like my concerns were irrational. I had assumed his confidence came from knowledge. In reality, it came from knowing he could manipulate me. He thought he had won, that he could gut our life and walk away unscathed. But there was one thing he hadn't considered. The deed had been in my name alone for months. During our last refinancing, Jason had blindly signed the papers, too eager for a lower interest rate to realize I had transferred full ownership to myself. His carelessness would be his downfall. That evening, shock hardened into resolve. I wasn't going to cry or beg. Jason wanted a fight? Fine. But this was a fight I was going to win. My first call was to Chloe, my lawyer and close friend. "He sold the apartment?" she repeated, incredulous. "Does he even realize he can't do that without your consent?" "Apparently not," I said, letting amusement creep into my tone. "He thinks he's already spent the money on his new life with Ashley." Chloe exhaled a dry laugh. "Well, he's in for a rude awakening. The sale is invalid, and if he's taken money from the buyer, he's on the hook for fraud." The word fraud sent a rush of satisfaction through me. "What's our next move?" I asked, ready to strike. Hannah's voice was sharp and decisive. "First, we'll notify the buyer that the sale isn't legal. Then, we'll draft a formal letter for Jason, outlining the consequences of his actions. If he's dumb enough to try anything else, we'll take him to court." As I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. Jason had thought he'd outmaneuvered me, leaving me scrambling and powerless, but in reality, he had just set himself up for the ultimate humiliation. I spent the rest of my trip compartmentalizing the betrayal, pouring my energy into work, and channeling every ounce of pain into a newfound purpose. The thought of reclaiming my life while watching Jason's smugness crumble gave me a strength I hadn't felt in months. By the time I boarded my flight home, I was ready to dismantle his lies, face him head-on, and start a new chapter on my own terms. During the flight, I reflected on how easily Jason had dismissed me, his arrogance so profound that he hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks. But instead of stewing in anger, I strategized. Jason thought he held all the power, but he didn't realize I'd been playing the long game without even knowing it. As soon as my plane touched down, I called Chloe. "I'm back," I said, hauling my suitcase off the luggage carousel. "What's the next step?" "We've already notified the buyer," she replied briskly. "They were furious at Jason for misleading them, so they're cooperating. That works in our favor." "And Jason?" I asked. "I sent him the formal letter this morning," she said, her tone edged with satisfaction. "It lays out the illegality of the sale, your sole ownership of the apartment, and the consequences of fraud. He hasn't responded yet, but if I had to guess, he's livid." "Good. Let him stew." When I arrived home, the apartment was eerily quiet, though Jason's belongings still littered the space. His jacket draped over a chair, his shoes carelessly tossed by the door. But something had shifted. This wasn't his home anymore. I took a deep breath and set down my suitcase, bracing for the inevitable confrontation. It didn't take long. That evening, Jason stormed in, face flushed with anger, phone clutched in his hand. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving the letter. "You're telling me I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine." I crossed my arms, meeting his fury with cool indifference. "No, Jason, it's not. The deed has been in my name for months. You can't sell something you don't own." He froze, confusion flickering across his face before twisting into rage. "What are you talking about?" Silently, I retrieved the deed from my file and held it up. "After we refinanced, I had the deed transferred to my name. You signed off on it, remember? Or did you skim the paperwork like you always do?" He stared at me, silent for a beat before sneering. "You think you're so smart, don't you? This doesn't change anything. I already made a deal, and you're going to look like a fool when it all falls apart." Unblinking, I met his gaze. "The sale is already void, Jason. The buyer knows it, and they're ready to take legal action if you don't return the money." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "And if you've spent a single cent of that deposit, you're in even bigger trouble." For the first time, I saw his confidence crack. His jaw tightened, his gaze shifting. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. I allowed myself a small smirk. "Oh, Jason," I said, voice steady. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. You've spent years treating me like I'm too naive to notice what you're doing," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "But guess what, Jason? I've been paying attention, and now you're going to deal with the consequences." He started pacing, frustration mounting, grasping for control. "This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You can't just kick me out of here." I raised an eyebrow, arms crossed. "Actually, I can. This apartment is legally mine. You can stay for now, but only because I'm giving you the courtesy of time to figure out your next move. But let me be clear, I'm not going anywhere." Over the next few days, Jason's anger turned to desperation, his voicemails swinging between begging and threats, but I remained unmoved. Meanwhile, Hannah worked behind the scenes, ensuring every legal loose end was tied up. The buyer, furious at being deceived, rescinded the deal, and Hannah prepared the divorce paperwork, tightening the legal noose around Jason. "You're in a good position, Isabella," she told me. "Jason has no leverage. Between the voided sale and potential fraud charges, he'll have to cooperate if he wants to avoid a bigger mess." Her words were a relief, but they also served as a stark reminder of how much power I had let Jason wield over my life. For years I had tolerated his arrogance, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But now I saw what I had sacrificed, and I was done being the one who compromised. That evening, my best friend Laura came over to help me reclaim my space. We boxed up Jason's belongings, stacking them neatly in the corner of the living room. She held up one of his gaudy ties with a smirk. "How's he taking all this?" she asked. I chuckled, tossing another item into a box. "Not well. He still thinks he can talk his way out of it, but I'm not budging." "Good," she said, throwing the tie in. "He doesn't deserve a single inch of your space or your time." A wave of gratitude washed over me. For so long, I had carried the emotional and financial weight of our marriage alone, while Jason reaped the benefits. But now, I had people in my corner, and that made all the difference. The final piece of my plan fell into place when Jason had the audacity to bring Ashley to my apartment. I was reviewing paperwork at the dining table when they strutted in, as if they owned the place. Ashley glanced around with a smug smile, her arm looped through Jason's. "So, this is where we're staying?" she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. My heart pounded, but my resolve was firm. I stood, my expression unreadable. "No," I said evenly. "This is where Jason was staying. You, Ashley, won't be staying here at all." Her smile wavered, and she glanced at Jason, who looked equally blindsided. "What is this?" he demanded, voice tight with frustration. I gestured around the apartment. "This is my home, not yours, not hers, and certainly not a hotel for you to shack up in after stabbing me in the back." Ashley's expression darkened, but she remained silent. Jason, however, was on the verge of losing it. "You can't do this," he roared. "You're being unreasonable." I met his fury with unwavering calm. "No, Jason, what's unreasonable is thinking you could sell my home, pocket the money, and expect me to just roll over. You're lucky I haven't filed criminal charges yet." Jason stood in the doorway, face flushed with frustration, while Ashley crossed her arms, her previous confidence crumbling. "You're being ridiculous, Isabella," he spat, his voice laced with desperation. "You can't just kick me out of my own home." I stepped forward, looking him dead in the eye. "Watch me." "This is my home, Jason," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. "The deed has been in my name for months, and you know it. You signed the paperwork without even reading it, just like you always do. So no, this isn't your home anymore." Ashley's manicured fingers clenched around the strap of her designer purse, her expression darkening as she turned to Jason. Wait, what is she talking about? She demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. You said this was your apartment, that you sold it. Jason flinched, trying to wave her off. It's complicated, I'll handle it. I stepped forward, arms crossed, my tone cutting through the tension like a blade. Oh, it's not complicated, Jason. You tried to sell an apartment that doesn't belong to you. The sale is void, and as of right now, you don't have a leg to stand on. Ashley's composure cracked, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. You mean the money you told me you had? She asked, her voice rising. Her gaze darted back to Jason, searching his face for answers. Oh my God, did you lie about that too? Jason stiffened, his hands lifting in a placating gesture. Nicole, I can fix this, I just need. But she cut him off with a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Don't. Just don't. I'm not getting dragged into your mess. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she slammed the door behind her. Jason stood frozen, stunned, as if the ground had just been ripped out from under him. A slow smile curled my lips as I watched the scene unfold. Looks like you're on your own now, I said, letting the words sink in before I gestured to the couch. Now let's talk about what happens next. Jason's shoulders sagged as he slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Isabella, please, he murmured, his voice thick with desperation. I screwed up, I know that, but you don't have to do this. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You're right, Jason, I don't have to do this, but I am. I turned, grabbing a thick folder from the kitchen counter and setting it on the coffee table in front of him. That's the divorce paperwork. My lawyer has already drafted it. I suggest you sign quickly. The sooner you do, the sooner we can both move on. He stared at the papers as if they might burst into flames, his face pale. You really hate me that much? He whispered. I met his gaze without flinching. Hate you? I repeated, my tone sharp with clarity. No, Jason, I pity you. You had everything. Someone who loved you, a home we built together, and you threw it all away because you couldn't see past your own ego. I exhaled slowly, my heart pounding, but my resolve remained unshaken. I want you out by the end of the day. Take your things, figure out where you're staying, but know this. This is the last time I'm giving you any grace. His mouth opened as if to argue, but he must have realized there was no fight left to win. His shoulders slumped, defeat settling in. Fine, he muttered under his breath. I'll go. I turned toward the door, resting my hand on the frame before looking back at him one final time. Good, I said, my voice calm but resolute. And don't even think about trying anything else. Then, without another glance, I walked away, leaving him sitting there, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. Chloe had already taken care of everything, and the next time Jason crossed a line, I wouldn't hesitate to let the courts handle it. As I opened the door, he slowly stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out without a word, his footsteps heavy with defeat. For a brief moment, a pang of sadness hit me, not for him, but for the life we could have had if he had been the man I once believed he was. But that feeling faded quickly, replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. I closed the door behind him, locking it with the new key I had made. This was my home now, and no one, especially not Jason, would ever take it away from me again. The silence that followed was deafening, yet for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of his presence, his entitlement, his lies, it was all gone. I stood in the center of the living room, taking in the emptiness where his things had been. The oversized gaming chair, the cluttered framed jerseys, the tacky coffee table he insisted on keeping. Everything that had suffocated the space was gone. The apartment looked brighter, cleaner, like it truly belonged to me. That evening, Samantha arrived with takeout and a bottle of wine, collapsing onto the couch with a dramatic sigh. Is he really gone? She asked, eyes scanning the room. I poured 2 glasses and handed her one. Gone and not coming back, I said, a satisfied smile creeping onto my face. I gave him until the end of the day to pack, and he didn't argue. She lifted her glass. To fresh starts and well-deserved victories. We clinked glasses, and as I took a sip, the weight of the past week started to lift. To never letting someone walk all over me again. Over the next few days, I reclaimed my apartment, rearranging furniture, moving my favorite artwork into the living room, and filling the space with things that made me happy. It wasn't just about redecorating, it was about reshaping my life into something that reflected me, not the person Jason had tried to mold. Hannah called with an update, her voice brimming with the kind of confidence that made me feel invincible. "The fraud charges are off the table. The buyer decided not to pursue them," she said. "But the divorce paperwork is moving smoothly. Once Jason signs, you'll be officially free." The word free sent a jolt through my chest. It wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about everything I had been carrying for years. The resentment, the self-doubt, the feeling of being trapped in a relationship that didn't value me. Jason, of course, tried to reach out. His messages ranged from weak apologies to desperate attempts at guilt-tripping me. "I made a mistake. Can't we at least talk?" Another was more frantic. "You're going to ruin me, Isabella. Is that what you want?" But I didn't respond. For once, I wasn't wasting my energy trying to fix something irreparably broken. He had made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences. By the end of the week, the apartment felt transformed, warm, inviting, and mine. As I curled up on the couch, a cup of tea in hand, the city lights twinkling beyond the window, I let myself reflect. Jason's betrayal had been a brutal wake-up call, but in a way, it had freed me. For too long, I had convinced myself that I had to settle, to accept the bare minimum, to be grateful for whatever scraps of love and respect he decided to offer. But now, I knew better, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I deserved more. I wasn't just reclaiming my apartment, I was reclaiming my life. A month later, everything felt different, not because of grand renovations, but because the space finally reflected me, my tastes, my energy, my independence. Without Jason's clutter and suffocating presence, the apartment felt lighter, freer, no longer a place tainted by compromise but a sanctuary of my own. The divorce moved forward seamlessly, thanks to Hannah's precision. Jason signed the papers without protest, realizing he had no leverage. No dramatic confrontation, no desperate last-ditch effort to fix what was irreparably broken, just a clean, emotionless break that felt both bittersweet and liberating. One afternoon, while sorting through old papers, I stumbled upon a photo of us from our early years, smiling, arms wrapped around each other, full of naive hope. For a fleeting moment, I let the memories wash over me, acknowledging that there had been good times, moments when I believed in the life we were building. But those moments had long been buried under years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. With a quiet exhale, I slipped the photo into an envelope and tucked it away. Not something I wanted displayed, but not something I was quite ready to destroy either. It was a piece of my past, but it no longer defined me. That evening, Samantha and I celebrated the finalized divorce at a trendy rooftop bar, the city glowing beneath us. "You're glowing," she said, lifting her cocktail in a toast. "Single life suits you." I laughed, warmth spreading through me in a way I hadn't felt in years. "It's not the single life," I corrected. "It's freedom." For the first time, I wasn't living under anyone else's expectations. I was writing my own story. We toasted to that, and as the night unfolded, so did my sense of pride. I had walked through the fire and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Back home, I began planning for the future. The apartment, once a battleground of unspoken resentment, had transformed into my personal retreat, a space that symbolized everything I had reclaimed. But I knew I wouldn't stay there forever. Someday I'd move to a new place, one without any lingering ghosts of my past. Until then, I would savor every moment in the home I had fought so hard to keep. As I curled up on the couch that night, a rare sense of peace settled over me. I thought back to that phone call, to Jason's laughter, so sure of his victory, and I couldn't help but smile. His arrogance had been his undoing. He had underestimated me, and that had been his fatal mistake. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I called the shots, where I chose happiness on my own terms. And, for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, undeniably free.